Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. In our previous discussion, we had started looking at the subject matter of this Upanishad, of this teaching of a sage called Śvetāśvatara, the one who has clarified, purified his senses through the practice of the eight-limbed path of yoga. So last time I discussed the subject matter of the first chapter in a nutshell, which was about the first chapter of this Upanishad is about making aware the listener and the student of the true nature of the self. So that's, in a nutshell, the subject matter of the first chapter. In the second chapter, the teacher, as I described in my previous class in great detail, the question arises that then how to practically experience it. This is your experience of your true nature of the self as you have experienced it. What if we want to experience it for ourselves? And for this purpose, Sage Shvetashvatara in the second chapter, he started speaking about the preliminary, the basic practices of yoga, which, as I explained, is the most ancient, clear mentioning of asanas, pranayama, and also the ideal places where to practice yoga, the beautiful natural setting that he describes, where there are green plants with aromatic flowers and the pleasing sound of water is nearby. That is his description. And this connection to Mother Nature, I think, is fundamental to the practice of yoga. Whether it is Hatha Yoga Pradipika, if you look at the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, one of the most modern texts composed in the 15th century, very recently, just 500 years ago. That's a lot of time, but compared to the time period that we are dealing with in these yogic teachings. This is very recent, because if we go back to 3,500, 4,000 years, then 500 years is nothing. And even that text starts with describing an ideal place, a matha, a hut, a hermitage, conducive to the practice of yoga. Again, a beautiful, natural description. One of the core ideas that, as we will see now in the following chapters, a new idea that Śvetāśvatara introduces, because how can pure consciousness on its own give rise to everything that exists? So for that, and he introduces a very new idea which has not been clearly mentioned in any one of the other Upanishads. The idea of Prakriti, Mother Nature, who is known as Prakriti, who is known as Maya, the wisdom with which this creation is created, and sometimes Shakti, potential, power, without which this entire creation process wouldn't be possible. So the moment one comes to yoga, as we can see very clearly in this Upanishad, the idea of Prakriti, the idea of Mother Nature, really becomes central, important, because yoga not only helps us to discover our own nature, but makes us aware and connects us back to the nature, to the environment around us. Then, not only the health of our physical body becomes of great concern, as again we saw last time, that the moment the discussion on yoga starts, arogya, good health, the absence of diseases, also becomes a topic. But then not only some of these diseases are rooted in my mental and physical environment, in the way I think, and then in the way I live, what I eat, how I live my life. But they are also deeply connected to the environment in which we live. Sadly, our roots, through which we are rooted into this environment, is not as clearly visible as they are in the case of the trees and plants. But if we would look with a meditative eye, then whether it is this constant breathing in and breathing out, whether it is this drinking of water, which we have to do within a few hours to remain alive, to be healthy, and then the food that we have to take in, and the fact that we constantly take in the environment through our senses, tells us that how deeply rooted we are in our external environment. And that's when this realization comes, then arises the idea of what, for example, George Feuerstein, one of the most prolific writers on yoga in modern times, terms as green yoga, the kind of practice of yoga which makes us more aware of our environment and the problems of environment. It inspires us to lead our life in such a way so that we can at least what is today known as sustainable living. A lifestyle that does not destroy the planet, the Mother Earth, on which we live. Again, a beautiful idea that goes back to the most ancient masters of yoga. Bhumihi Mata, this earth is my mother. Usually what we find in different cultures is a particular portion of mother is referred to as the motherland. Today, even in India, Bharata Mata, Mother India, this concept has come into existence. But let me be historically very clear that this concept of Bharata Mata, Mother India, at least to my knowledge, arises in the 19th and 20th century. The concepts that we find before that, even in the most ancient collection of teachings, are those of Mother Earth, in which the entire planet Earth is seen like a mother. And the Rishi, the yogi, the master of the Vedas beautifully declares, there are beautiful hymns dedicated to Mother Earth, because while the realm of light is compared to the father, Deities, from which ancient Greek terms such as Zeus, Pater, and Jupiter in Rome arise, we have the same Vedic equivalent, Deities in the Vedas, Deities in the Vedas, which means the realm of light, the father, the realm of light as the father. And I think it is very clear that it is the light coming from the realm of light which impregnates this mother with Mother Earth, with life, and then not only impregnates it, but sustains life, and then ultimately merges all this life, ultimately merges back into that light. So, but yes, the yogic masters declare very proudly that this Mother Earth is my mother, and I am the child of this Mother Earth. So not only worrying about our own health, first of all about yes, that's extremely important. We have to worry about our physical health. We need to have a healthy body. And even more important than that is to have a healthy mind. Sometimes even if the body is sick and if the mind is healthy, strong, has that strength, then again it can bring the body back on track. And then this Mother Earth on which we live, on which we depend, that too needs to be healthy. So all these ideas are deeply connected in the yogic teachings, in the yogic understanding, as we saw in the previous discussion. And that is when yoga as a practice, as a way of life, as a philosophy, as a teaching becomes extremely meaningful today. We might think that what difference does it make as an individual if I would live a sustainable life? What difference will it make in big cities like Delhi, where there is such a big problem of pollution? But I think the simple answer of this question is that if everybody would think like that, then no government would have any taxes. And already back at the time of Akbar and Birbal, there is a beautiful story that once Akbar wanted a pool of milk and asked everybody in his kingdom to contribute just one lota, which means one glass of milk, to this pool of milk so that he can have a pool of milk. Birbal said, if you want to understand the mentality of your people, please ask them to come and fill this pool of milk at night. And then everybody thought that everybody is going to pour a glass of milk if I pour 1 glass of water, what difference will it make? And next day in the morning, when Akbar went to see his pool of milk, it was filled with water. Because everybody thought the same thing. And I think this is the same problem which we have with environmental issues. When I look at the news, I feel not only individuals, but governments are suffering with the same problem today. Even governments are bringing up this argument that what will one country alone, a small country like ours, do when such big countries are contributing so much to pollution? We have to come back on an individual level. Yoga is about changing ourselves, and that is why it inspires us to lead a life. And what sustainable living means, there is so much literature on that. It should be enough today for me to say that yoga beautifully, deeply, through his teachings, has constantly, if a person really wants to lead his life in accordance to the yogic teachings, there is no other choice than using and living a sustainable lifestyle. A lifestyle that is not destructive to the environment, but is supportive to the inner, physical, psychological, as well as the external environment. Now, as we proceed further in this discussion on the important ideas found in this Upanishad, before we actually start studying the mantras of these Upanishads, it's always nice to have an overall idea of the Upanishad before we start studying it. So, let me also talk about the other chapters, because there are 6 chapters in this Upanishad. The 3rd chapter, there are many new ideas in this Upanishad. This is traditionally it is the 11th Upanishad. Therefore, I also chronologically, based on its time period, it was compiled, brought together in its present form after most of the earlier 10 Upanishads, except maybe 1 or 2 Upanishads which fall in the same time period. This Upanishad introduces many new ideas. One of them is the idea of a personal deity, which doesn't exist in the 10 principal Upanishads. A personal deity, a form which can be used for the purpose of meditation. This personal deity then becomes central to the later Hatha Yoga texts. In this teaching, it is either sometimes referred to as Rudra, an extremely ancient name, and sometimes as Shiva. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. First of all, the very ancient name that has been used here for this personal deity is Rudra. We will look at the meaning of this word. Originally, in the most ancient sections of the Vedas, this word has been mostly applied for fire, simply for fire, for the deity within, for the light of the fire in the fire pit. But later on, particularly we see this transformation in this Upanishad, where this word then has been used for a supreme deity that can be used as a symbol to meditate upon that formless, nameless consciousness. What is the meaning of this word if we go into the meaning? The word has also been used, as I said, it's an extremely ancient word, but either it is used for fire, or in the earlier 10 Upanishads, it is used for the pranas, for the various pranas, vital breaths traveling within the body, and also for the senses, but never for a supreme personal deity. That shift is for the first time only visible in this Upanishad, and I think this shift came about with another new idea that is being introduced towards the end of the Upanishad: devotion, deep love. And devotional practices require a name, devotional practices require an object, devotional practices require a tangible, visible object on which the mind can rest, with which the mind can engage, which can be used for the mind to settle on. And that's why such forms are used in all the meditative traditions, whether it is the Buddhist meditative traditions, whether it is the Jaina meditative traditions, whether it is the Shiva, Sankhya, or even as we will see now in the Upanishadic meditative traditions, also such forms are used with the awareness that the supreme principle of pure consciousness transcends all forms and names, and this is just a device, a prop you can use, like a prop we use in our practice of yoga. When the posture is too difficult, I can't reach my toes in Paschimottanasana, then let me use a belt and let me start practicing with the belt. Let me at least keep my back straight even if I can't reach my toes. And then gradually, at some point when I can reach my toes, then I have to throw away the belt. The same is true about these forms. So the name that has been used here is Rudra. And Rudra, there are two ways of explaining it. Rut directly is related to Rodana. Rodana, anybody speaking Hindi will understand, weeping. So Rut means weeping. And the one that destroys our weeping, the one that destroys, in other words, Rut simply means suffering. The one that destroys our suffering, and its very cause, because the cause of suffering in the understanding of the Upanishadic masters is always ignorance. So the light that destroys the darkness of ignorance, that light is called Rudra. And when the fire symbolizes the fire in the fire pit, present in front of the rishi, when he uses and when he meditates upon that crackling, burning fire in front of him as a symbol to that inner fire of wisdom, when he uses the kindling of this fire by rubbing the two fire sticks, the tremendous effort that a person has to put into it, when he takes that as a symbol to his practice of yoga, because this is deeply connected to the practice of yoga. Often meditation is compared to the churning of the fire sticks, or the churning of the water, the churning of the curd to reveal the butter in it. The examples that Śvetāśvatara himself in this Upanishad gives, as I told you the last time. Then he uses the word Rudra even for the fire present in front of him. And that's why I said that in the most ancient collection of teachings, the word Rudra is used in the hymns addressed to the fire crackling in front of the males and female masters of the ancient Vedas. They use the word Rudra. Here now it is being used for a deeper inner essence. The word Rut, with the help of some grammatical formulas, it can also be explained as Ruj. And Ruj means roga, diseases. And again, the greatest disease is this human suffering. So again, it comes to the same. It's just two different ways that the commentators explain this word Rudra. The wisdom, the understanding, the knowledge that destroys suffering and its fundamental causes, as listed by Patanjali very clearly: ignorance, limited understanding of oneself, selfish attachment, hatred, and fear. The five that he refers to as the five fundamental causes of suffering. This Upanishad particularly points out three of them: ignorance, selfish attachment, and hatred. The three most important ones. The one that totally eliminates them, that is called Rudra. That is the meaning of the word Rudra, a very ancient word used for the personal deity in this Upanishad. Another word that has been used for the personal deity here is a well-known word, Shiva. Shiva simply means auspicious. Again, it is the most auspicious entity because it is blissful and it helps an individual to transcend suffering. What is something auspicious? Auspicious is that which helps us to get out of suffering, get out of negativity. That which Mangala, auspicious, the Sanskrit word for Mangala, for auspicious is Mangala, which is explained by the masters as that which removes the impurities, the malas, like in our prayer to Sage Patanjali that we recite every day. We express our gratitude to Sage Patanjali because he shows us the path to remove the impurities on the level of the physical body through his treatises on Ayurveda, on the level of the mind through his treatises on yoga, and on the level of speech through his treatises on Sanskrit grammar. That is what yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya chavaidhyakena. That word mala, the one who removes mala. That is why he is a great muni. That's why he is a great contemplative, not a mere contemplative, but a great contemplative, because he reduces the malas, the impurities. And the one that is completely free from all these impurities, that is called Shiva. So one can look at it as an archetypal figure, as an archetypal state of pure consciousness. The goal that every yogin, through his practice of yoga, wants to achieve, the purification of consciousness. So that is what the word Shiva has been used widely. It's again a very ancient word and has been used widely in the Buddhist traditions, in the Jaina traditions, as well as in the Hindu traditions. I think in the Buddhist traditions, the scholar that most widely uses it, makes use of it, is Nagarjuna in his work on the middle path, Madhyamaka Karika, in which he compares he refers to his idea of dependent origination as Shiva. He uses the word Shiva there. And he even concludes his remarks on dependent origination by saying that those who are lost in existence and those who are lost in non-existence, both of them fail to see Shiva, to see that middle path which is neither completely existent nor completely, it neither can it be described as existent nor can it be described as non-existent. The same idea that is applied in Advaita Vedanta for pure consciousness. And how is it so? That's a detailed discussion. I will not get into it, but just to point out how the word Shiva has been used by various masters throughout the centuries, coming from different traditions. And in the same way, the earlier 10 Upanishads, the principal 10 Upanishads, don't use the word Shiva for a personal deity that is a unique thing in this 11th Upanishad. But one of the earlier Upanishads, some of them, not only one, but some of them, especially the Mandukya Upanishad, which develops the symbology of the symbolical meaning of the monosyllable Om and its 3 letters, and the last letter, the silence, the unpronounced letter, so it becomes 4 letters, A, U, Ma, and the silence that follows. The silence that follows, the 4th letter, the letter that is not pronounced, but is inevitably there after you have closed your mouth, and your breath is over. Even if you very quickly breathe in, still inevitably a few seconds of silence is present. You cannot pronounce Om without that silence. That's why the masters usually emphasize on that silence and prolong it, ask us to prolong it, tell us that it is more important to focus on that silence than all the 3 letters together. The 3 letters, they are just pointers to that silence. And that silence symbolizes the state of consciousness in meditation, according to Mandukya Upanishad, and it is there that the word Shiva, again, for that state of meditation, the deep state of meditation, that silence present at the end of the letter Om, there the word Shiva has been used for that state. Similarly, many Jaina masters, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, when I started being interested in the Jaina teachings on yoga, I was just exploring Jaina teachings. A lot of them, particularly within the last 1,000 years, are in Sanskrit, and so they are easily accessible to me. The ones prior to that mostly are in Prakrit, in the vernacular languages, ancient vernacular languages of India, which is very difficult for me, like the Buddha's teachings. But Pali is more easily understandable to me. Coming from a Sanskrit background, I can understand around 70 to 80% of Pali. But Prakrit, the Prakrit languages used by Jaina masters, I still find it very, very difficult to understand. But when I was exploring some of the Sanskrit literature from the 7th century, there is a very beautiful hymn dedicated to Lord Mahavira, sung by Lata Mangeshkar, the greatest singer of modern India. Sadly now she is sick and she is in hospital, but a very, very famous singer who has sung. I think she has the world record of recording the biggest amount of songs. She has sung this beautiful hymn in which Lord Mahavira is praised as Shiva. So the word Shiva is repeatedly also used in Jainism for Mahavira. In any case, this Upanishad is therefore the first text that we have in front of us. Yes, The Shaiva Agama texts are extremely ancient, but at least the available texts are not as ancient as this Upanishad. This Upanishad is the most ancient work that points out to Shiva as a personal deity, as an object of meditation. The deity that is frequently referred to by the later Hatha Yoga texts, such as Hatha Yoga Pradipika, when it starts by prostrating in front of Adinatha, the first Lord who originally gave the teachings of yoga. Most of the Hatha Yoga texts are dialogues between Shiva and Shakti, this consciousness and energy within the human being, but as a personal deity, this idea. And it's a beautiful symbol, and that is why it is a very deep symbol. As a symbol, it has tremendous depths, and that is why I think the scientists at CERN in Geneva, where this Large Hadron Collider exists, they must have chosen to have a big Nataraja statue at the entrance of the large LHD, the Large Hadron Collider. And that Nataraja really shows the connection between fire and Shiva, because what you see in this, it's one of the most beautiful representations of Lord Shiva dancing on a tiny little man who represents a demon, a tiny little demon whom he tramples, who represents the ignorance that I was talking about, and its concomitants, the selfish desire and hatred, and then also ego and fear. And he's within this circle of fire, dancing within this circle of fire. Fire itself seems like dancing. When you look at the crackling fire, it feels like really dancing. And then even in his hands, he has fire. So the whole symbol, we can see how Rudra, which originally was the name of fire, evolved into this symbol of Lord Shiva as a personal deity. If you are more interested in exploring the symbolical significance of Shiva, there is a beautiful recording. I think it is really in the sound of the voice is of Aldous Huxley, who was a great author, a very influential author. In the 60s and 70s, most Westerners came to India after reading Aldous Huxley. I'm a great fan of him after reading his The Perennial Philosophy, in which he really, the first chapter is Tattvamasi, you are that, this teaching from the Upanishads. And yet he beautifully brings together the teachings of ancient Indian mysticism, Buddhism, Christian mysticism, Islamic mysticism, of Sufism, and he really draws out the very essence and presents it in very easy, understandable terms. And on YouTube, you can find a beautiful explanation of Lord Shiva in his understanding, which I heard many years ago, but I found it deeply, very revealing, very, very easy to understand, and very beautifully explained. The main point is never to forget that these forms are given in the Upanishads only for the sake of meditation, to cultivate devotion as a means to go into the deeper states of meditation. In the Advaita Vedantic traditions, Lord Shiva is usually depicted as Dakshinamurti. There are various temples in South India to Lord Dakshinamurti. In our ashram, if you go to the Divine Mother temple, on one side of it, there is a beautiful temple of Dakshinamurti. So Dakshinamurti is represented as a young child, 5-6 years old child, very young child, sitting under a tree, under a banyan tree, and that's why Dakshinamurti temples have to be under banyan trees, teaching for very old men. And again, sitting, but trampling that, what do we call, when somebody is very small? Dwarf, yes, this dwarf who symbolizes, again, ignorance. So the same symbology is there. And these 4 old students symbolize the 4 faculties of the mind, the intellect, ego, and memory, which have become very old. And this old, rigid, no more radiant, and this child, which symbolizes this new awareness of one's true nature, ever fresh, supple, ready to be impressed by everything, accepting everything. A child has tremendous acceptance. It accepts anything and everything. You can mold a child in any shape that you want because it has no mold. We shape it, and then by shaping it, we condition it also. And that's why for the yogic masters, always the great ideal is the child. Always. And that's why some of the Upanishads are even called Subala Upanishads, the Upanishads of the beautiful child. And one of the famous sentences in the principal Upanishads is, after exploring all the scholarship and reaching the pinnacle of scholarship, become like a child. That is the next step after scholarship. So, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition of Shankaracharya, we generally meditate and worship on the master, on the universal master as Dakshinamurti, as this small little child, teaching these teachings under a banyan tree, and this banyan tree is this physical body. As we see in the yogic texts, the banyan tree symbolizes the physical body. And sitting under it, sitting beneath it, sitting within it, he's teaching these 4 faculties. So it's this inner communion which is made possible through the practice of yoga, which is being symbolized. And that is why the yogic commentator, the most yogic commentator of this Upanishad, the one who comments on the Yoga Sutras, my favorite commentator on the Yoga Sutras, as I mentioned last time, Vijnana Bhikshu, because he speaks from his experience, he has also commented on this Upanishad. And when he starts his commentary on this Upanishad, I think he was from the 14th century, when he comments on this Upanishad, he starts his commentary with a prayer to Lord Dakshinamurti, to Sage Dakshinamurti, to this child form of Shiva. My understanding of Tibetan Buddhism is very limited, and yet I'm deeply interested in it, particularly in the Dzogchen aspect of Buddhism, because it is, from whatever, again, my understanding is very limited, but from whatever I have heard from my friends well-versed in Advaita Vedanta and who have explored Dzogchen before me, they say that it is tremendously similar. And this is the reason that many traditional scholars now, for example, Sarvapriyananda from Ramakrishna Mission, one of the most widely viewed teacher from Ramakrishna Mission, coming from an Advaita Vedanta tradition now. Again, I see him so often also referring to Dzogchen. So there are many similarities between Tibetan Buddhism and Hinduism particularly. Often it perplexes me, and I would like to explore it further, but my limited understanding of Tibetan language always limits me. But what I find very interesting is the deep connection that there is between Avalokiteshvara and Shiva. Even the word Ishvara is used for both of them. And when I was recently reading the origin of the name of the Dalai Lama's palace in Lhasa, the Potala Palace. Potala is in fact a mythological South Indian mountain on which Lord Shiva taught the Tamil language and the Tamil grammar, again an extremely ancient language of India, maybe even more ancient than Sanskrit, many scholars now believe, that he taught the Tamil language to sage Agastya on top of that mountain. It is very interesting that the Dalai Lamas, when they constructed this palace, they chose that name for the residence of the Dalai Lama, who was seen as an embodiment of Avalokiteshvara. So that's very interesting. And even when I look at some of the Hindu regions that border the Tibetan cultural region. By Tibetan cultural region, I don't only mean Tibet as known today, but even areas in India which are influenced by Tibetan culture. So if you go, for example, beyond Manali in Himachal Pradesh, I have not been to those temples, but I have heard from my friends from Lahore and Spiti region, where there are many ancient temples where the same deity, the same form is worshipped by Buddhist pilgrims as Avalokiteshvara and by Hindu pilgrims as Lord Shiva. So again, this connection became very clear to me. And even because I spend my summer in Kullu, in the Kullu region, and the highest mountain in that area from where you can see the entire, it's a breathtaking view from up there. It's an amazing view. And it's frightening, in fact, because when you really stand at the edge, you are a few kilometers high up in the air, and down below, few kilometers down below, you see the entire Kullu valley, just as if I'm standing here and it's just really down there. It's really frightening, a frightening experience to go up there on top of that mountain. I was up there this summer. But you can see the entire, even the what you see in the front is the Kullu airport, and then the entire Kullu, many cities you see from on top of that mountain. What I found very interesting up there is a very ancient temple of Lord Shiva, which historically is supposed to have been destroyed by a thunderbolt, which is very easy to imagine, not very difficult, that the statue of Shiva was there destroyed by a thunderbolt, and then it was recreated with the help of butter. And again, this is an idea that exists otherwise only in Tibet, because Tibetans, they are amazing in their creation of butter sculptures. It's a great artwork there. In India, it doesn't exist, and it cannot exist because India is a hot country. Butter melts, so you cannot create statues out of it. And yet, there, somebody must have thought of making a statue. And today, if you go into the temple, the statue, the Shivalingam that you see of Lord Shiva is not of butter, it's of stone, but it is still colored in butter. So which means it is colored in such a way so that when you look at it, it seems as if it is made out of butter. And when I was up there this summer, hundreds of Tibetan Buddhist monks were coming down. They were running in such speed, and I was climbing up, so I did not have the time to ask them, why did you visit this place? When I went up there, all around the temple were so many Tibetan prayer flags. So that really perplexed me, and again pointed out to the synthesis and to the undercurrents which deeply connect us. Externally, why I'm saying this, that sometimes the Western way of looking at these traditions is very compartmentalized. This is a compartment, this is different. They are very different from each other. This is one religion, this is another religion. I don't think this is the way we look at things here traditionally in India. We rather look at the deep interconnectedness, the deep similarities between all these meditative traditions. That is what yoga is about. It appreciates the unity within that diversity without getting too much lost in the apparent diversity, but really focuses on the unity. That is when we come closer. That is when we start loving each other. That is when we start welcoming each other. So, and I should not forget that the Sanskrit word for Dzogchen is Ati Yoga, the greatest form of yoga. So again, it is just development of yoga. So this was just to point out some of the ideas related to the symbol of Shiva that will be pointed out in the 3rd chapter as a personal deity. The 3rd chapter is very much dedicated to this personal deity, where it is pointed out as there is only one supreme deity, which is, but of course, again, its property as being something internal has been emphasized as the prime mover of the intellect, the consciousness, I, that use the intellect as a tool. And with the help of yoga, I acquire greater mastery over my intellect. I have already some mastery over my intellect. I can engage it, I can direct it, but not as much as the kind of mastery that one can acquire on intellect through the practice of yoga. But still the point is that the intellect is a tool in the understanding of yoga. That's why the word karana is so often used for these inner faculties, including the intellect. Karana means an instrument, a tool. So the one that uses the tool, the consciousness that uses that tool, that consciousness is referred to as Shiva. And the master again and again in the 3rd chapter also points out that this essence that I'm talking about resides within the hearts of all beings, and that's why they can explore it by entering within. So again, the inspiration of looking within oneself through yoga. Then in the 4th chapter, he shifts his, first of all, in the 3rd chapter, he speaks about the personal deity. And then he, in the 4th chapter, he focuses on what we can call the Upanishadic trinity, or the Vedantic trinity, which is Father, Mother, and Child. Father, Mother, and Child. Universal consciousness as the Father, and the energy, Shakti, as the Mother, and the consciousness limited by its ignorance of its true nature, of its fatherly nature, because of identifying with the limiting adjuncts, the body, the limited body, and the limited mind, and thus considering itself totally limited and ignorant in nature, that state of consciousness is referred to as the child. So the third chapter is about these three. Brahman is pure consciousness, the words that I referred to earlier, Prakriti, Mother Nature, Maya, and Shakti, Shakti which means potential. These three words have been used for the mother, and she's referred to, in fact, feminine terms have been used there for her, primarily because the word Prakriti, Maya and Shakti, all of them are feminine words. And then the third one is Jiva, the embodied being, the breathing one, the one that breathes, because the word Jiva means the one that breathes. Jiva means to breathe, so the breathing one, which means the embodied consciousness. The fourth chapter, because at the end of the third chapter the master said that it inspires the tools. So the prayer with which he starts is that if it inspires the tools, then let it inspire my intellect to follow the light. That is how the prayer in the fourth chapter starts. It is referred to as that which pervades everything, and which says, there also is a beautiful hymn that you become the man, you become the woman, you become the son, you become the boy, you become the girl, you become everything. So it's a beautiful context. And also in this context, this master refers to this famous example that I keep on referring, which is very ancient, about the two birds living on the same tree, one enjoying the fruits of that tree, the other one simply being a witness. And the one that enjoys the fruits of the tree sometimes tastes sweet fruits, sometimes has to taste bitter fruits, but when it sees the other bird simply witnessing everything and completely calm, then it becomes like that bird. And then the master concludes by saying that, well, I spoke of two birds, but in reality there is only one bird. I and my father are one. The child and the father, they are one and the same thing. So then that union with the father has been expressed, but then also there, it is in that context after these two birds that then the third, what is that? Tree on which these two birds have been seemingly separated. That third, that tree on which both of them are residing, that is Prakriti, that is Mother Nature. So like this, the symbology has been developed through many images in the fourth chapter. The goal is to transcend what is right and what is wrong, both to find peace within oneself. There's a beautiful saying that has been quoted by Shankaracharya in his commentary in this context, that dharma, which means righteousness, is also like a rope to pull ourselves up, and our evil deeds are like ropes that pull ourselves down. This wisdom is like a sword which cuts both ropes and allows us to remain in the center within, neither being pulled up nor being pulled down, but simply being in peace. So different, with the help of different images, the masters have developed this idea. This is the subject matter of the third chapter. It concludes with a very ancient passage, which has been a very inspiring passage for me. I love this passage because it comes from the most ancient collection of teachings, about which sometimes, at least the earlier Western scholars who had started exploring the ancient Vedic teachings, sometimes you find them referring to them as very childish, primitive in nature. And even sometimes when you look at the translations, they seem very childish and very primitive. Now I'm talking about the extremely ancient collections of teachings of India known as the Rig Veda. The hymns sometimes seem very, very childish and very, very primitive. But then there is a key to those hymns found within those hymns themselves. What they say, that which has been expressed in the indestructible sound of Om, and that which resides within the hearts of all beings, in the inner space in which all the deities that we worship reside. Someone who has experienced that, only they can understand the true meaning of these hymns. Those who don't know it, they cannot appreciate the meaning of these hymns, but those who have experienced it, they can deeply settle into these hymns. And that is when I realized that when looking at this mantra, I realized that sometimes these teachings, which seem so childish and primitive when we look at them just merely with the help of a translation, or just even read like this in Sanskrit, but when you look at the deep symbolical significance of those mantras, they are just amazing, extremely amazing in their depth. So this Upanishad also points out to that fact, which helps us, like in the very beginning when we started studying this Upanishad, I said that through the practice of yoga, we deepen our study of the teachings of the masters. And by studying the teachings of the masters, we deepen our practice. So when we go deeper into our practice, we also see the secret meanings of the teachings of the masters. So simply knowing the language, even knowing Sanskrit language, is no guarantee to be able to truly understand what the masters are trying to convey. The guarantee is when we practice yoga, when we follow the yogic path, and when we reach those levels of depth, then we can explore the depth of those teachings. That is what sage Śvetāśvatara points out at the end of the 4th chapter. Now we will continue exploring the subject matter. Each chapter has around 20 to 30 verses, so I'm just trying to present it in a nutshell, in a more concise way, so that we have an idea what this Upanishad is about before we actually plunge into the teachings of sage Śvetāśvatara. Any questions? Yes?
You said that Shiva was described as the middle path between being and non-being.
Yes, by Nagarjuna.
Yeah.
Yes.
At that time, will it be acceptable to describe it as absence of being and absence of non-being? Like way statement and one pose statement that absence of being and absence of non-being is Shiva?
Yes.
Will it be too early to say this? Because at that time they would have said the middle path, or maybe an idea that came after?
Yes. An idea that came.
That came after?
And Nagarjuna is the proponent, is really, of course, the idea of taking the middle path goes back to the Buddha himself. But he takes it, he develops the philosophical implications of choosing the middle path in every concept. So for example, for him, it's about avoiding total nihilism, that nothing exists at all, and also the idea that there is something permanent in this ever-changing reality. So to hold to something permanent. So neither it is holding to something supremely permanent, nor it is a total negation of anything that exists. But he always goes to the middle path. And I think in this, Advaita Vedanta is deeply influenced from that, from those views of Nagarjuna, because the way later Advaita Vedantic masters, 7th century, 6th century, Gaudapada in his Karika on Mandukya Upanishad, Sriharsha, 12th century, great Advaita Vedanta masters, they explain Brahman. They explain it precisely in the same term. However, it is very difficult to make sense. And just briefly, an example that I so often give is of light itself. And there is this dark chamber. It was done as a scientific experiment, that if you take a projector with a very strong light and shine that light into a dark chamber, but make sure that that light does not fall on anything, does not touch any surface, then if you look into that dark chamber, what you see is total darkness. Even though the light is shining into it. But the moment you stick into it, a wand into it, that wand gets enlightened, gets illuminated. Let's use that word, illuminated. But till the wand is not there, is light there or is it not there? How would you describe it? Would you describe it as the light is absent? Well, if the light is absent, then why do I see it the moment I stick the wand into it? Is it present? Well, if it's present, then why can my eyes not see it? Why do I see darkness in that chamber? So there you fall into a problem of description of light. How will you describe it? As light or as darkness? As present or as non-absent? As absent? You have to take the middle path. You have to say either it is both or it's neither both. And I think the same problem is faced by the Upanishadic Vedantic masters or the Madhyamika masters when they describe, whether they are describing the shunya, the emptiness that they want to describe, or whether the light of Brahman that the Upanishadic masters want to describe. They fall into the same dilemma, how to describe it. Neither this description seems perfect, nor this description seems perfect. So that example really makes it clear why there is this struggling in descriptions. So that is my understanding of how I look at it, which when we in our Upanishad courses we have discussed on this in great detail. Any other? Ati Yoga, yes. Ati Yoga, yes, that's what I said. No, it's perfectly fine. It means the yoga beyond yoga. Ati means atikramana, to go beyond. So it's Ati Yoga means to go beyond even yoga. So it's, yeah. Okay, so no, Adi is different. Then it has to be Adi. Adi means original. So if it's Adi Yoga, then it means the original primordial yoga. But the English transliterations, which I have seen of this word because I read Tibetan works in English, so there I have always seen ATI. Ati Yoga, which means the highest yoga, the greatest yoga. So that is the Sanskrit word which they use for Dzogchen. Yes. I have never seen Adi Yoga, but of course you would know better than me, but I have not seen Adi Yoga.
Usually there are many terms used in Adi.
Okay. Primordial.
And in Tibetan, the Dzogchen master used Ati.
Ati.
There's some in Tibetan texts, this argument is not used originally, used in Sanskrit.
That's why, yes. But Ati, yes, is totally correct in Sanskrit, from a Sanskrit viewpoint, that it means beyond yoga. Ati means to go beyond. Atitya, atikramana, to go beyond. So Adi Yoga means to go beyond yoga. That's what it means. And even the name itself sounds so exciting. We are practitioners of yoga, and then there is something somewhere which even takes us beyond yoga. So that has to be explored. Anu Yoga is also there, yes. That's from Kashmir Shaivism, yes. I think Ati Yoga is also there in Kashmir Shaivism. Also the word Ati Yoga is used. I'm now not sure anymore, but Anu Yoga, different types of yogas have been mentioned. Many of the Buddhist masters went to study to Kashmir. So there is deep connection between Kashmir Shaivism. I forgot to mention that when I was talking about Shaivism, that again there is a deep connection. And then Mount Kailash is today in Tibet. It is equally sacred to Tibetan masters as it is to the Hindu Shiva masters. The sacred lake there is sacred to all these different traditions. So this really shows how deeply connected we all are. And it is this connection. Yes? Wow. You have not seen the text, the fifth Dalai Lama. And he's the one who constructed the Potala Palace. Is it the fifth Dalai Lama or the second one?
First Dalai Lama.
Okay.
Using the residence.
Is already the first Dalai Lama. Okay.
Originally they constructed around the 6th century.
6th century. Okay.
The emperor.
The emperor. Okay. Interesting.
Married with the Chinese people.
With the Chinese princess, yes, that story I have read.
They constructed
This. Okay. How interesting. Sometimes also just to look at temporal, historically, to all these occurrences. Anyway, thank you very much. Let us conclude. If any question still remains, you can ask me after the completion. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. My humble salutations to you. Thank you very much.